Claire Bennett rubbed her eyes as she darted through the airport terminal, backpack slung over one shoulder, heart racing. Her sneakers, well past the point of retirement, squeaked on the polished tile. She glanced at her phone for the 10th time. Gate 23B, she mumbled, the letters swimming on the screen as exhaustion pulled at her vision. 12 hours in the ICU, 2 hours of sleep, 1 rushed shower, and now the possibility of missing her first vacation in 3 years. That's what this was supposed to be. A break, a breath. She hadn't even wanted to go, but Lena had insisted. "Come on, Claire," her best friend had said. 2 days in Atlantic City. No scrubs, no monitors, no guilt. It sounded impossible, and yet here she was, late, delirious, and determined. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A text from Lena. "Boarding now. Where are you?" Claire typed back with trembling thumbs. "Almost there." It was a lie. Truthfully, she had no idea where she was in the terminal. Everything looked the same. She turned a corner and spotted a small cluster of well-dressed travelers being ushered through a side gate. Private aviation terminal. That didn't sound right. But before logic could catch up with her legs, someone stepped forward. "Miss Jennings," a woman in a navy blue uniform asked, smiling professionally. Claire blinked. But before she could finish, another staff member appeared. "We're ready to board now. Mr. Cross is already on the plane." Claire opened her mouth again. Surely this was a mistake, but her limbs were too heavy, her brain too foggy. Everything had been too much for too long. She followed them down a narrow hallway, words caught in her throat. It wasn't until they reached the aircraft, a sleek, polished jet with chrome trim, that panic began to crawl up her spine. This isn't commercial," Claire managed. "Don't worry," the attendant said, already lifting her bag. "Mr. Cross said you might be running behind. He's quite understanding." Mr. Cross? Who the hell was Mr. Cross? Inside, the cabin looked like something from a luxury design magazine. Cream leather seats, soft lighting, walnut paneling. Claire stood frozen near the entry, overwhelmed by the scent of leather and fresh flowers. This couldn't be real. And then he turned. The man seated by the window glanced up from a tablet. He looked like he belonged on a Forbes cover, early 30s, sharply dressed, effortlessly handsome, in that infuriating, expensive sort of way. His eyes fixed on her. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by something colder. Calculating. "You're not Vanessa Jennings," he said flatly. "No," Claire said, gripping her phone like a lifeline. "I'm Claire Bennett, and I think I just got on the wrong plane." A beat of silence. Then he closed his tablet and gave a slight incredulous smile. Apparently so. Outside, the runway was already in motion. The ground crew retreated. The hum of engines deepened. "I need to get off," Claire said, alarm blooming in her chest. "I'm supposed to be flying to Atlantic City with a friend." The man, Mr. Cross, she assumed, glanced out the window. "I'm afraid we've already been cleared for takeoff." Claire's knees nearly buckled. She sank into the nearest seat. "Where is this plane going?" she whispered. "Paris." She stared at him. "Paris, as in France?" He nodded, calm as ever. "This can't be happening," she muttered, fingers clawing at her seatbelt. "I don't even have my—" She stopped. No, wait. She did have her passport. She hadn't unpacked it since applying for Ethan's FAFSA. "Seems the staff thought you were my companion for the weekend," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Vanessa Jennings is a model. She was supposed to join me." A pause. "Apparently, you've taken her place." Claire looked at him like he was speaking another language. He studied her, and his voice softened. "Do you need water?" She nodded numbly. He handed her a glass. "Julian Cross," he said, since we're, well, airborne. Claire Bennett, she murmured, and I can't go to Paris. I have a shift Monday. I have a brother. He's staying with my aunt. I can't just vanish. The name Ethan hung silently in her mind. Julian leaned back, the look on his face unreadable. What do you do? I'm a nurse, she said automatically. ICU, Memorial Hospital. He nodded, as if that explained something. And the brother? Ethan. He's 18. Since our parents died, it's just been me. There. It was out. The whole sad, messy truth. Claire stared down at her shoes, her faded jeans, her unwashed hair. The ache behind her eyes throbbed harder. Julian said nothing for a long moment. The hum of the jet filled the silence. I understand responsibility, he said finally, voice low. More than most. Claire didn't answer. Once we land, he said, I can have you on the first flight back to the States. Wherever you need. You do that? Of course. This isn't your fault. Then he added with a faint smile, though I am curious how you managed to get past a multi-million-dollar security system and board my plane. Claire flushed. I was tired. I just followed the crowd. Someone called me Miss Jennings. I tried to correct them, but everything happened so fast. Julian actually looked impressed. Well, Claire Bennett, you may have a future in espionage. For the first time since boarding, Claire laughed. A small, tired sound. The flight attendant reappeared with food. Claire hadn't realized she was starving. She took a sandwich that looked like it cost more than her week's groceries. As she ate, Julian said simply, "Tell me about being a nurse." And she did. She told him about the long nights, the heartbeats she couldn't save, the ones she could. She told him about Ethan's college dreams, the mortgage hanging over her head, the scholarships they were praying for. In return, Julian spoke of his partner, Mark, and the company they built. How Mark had died in a climbing accident less than a year ago. How nothing felt real since. Is that why you're going to Paris? Claire asked quietly. To get away? He looked surprised by the insight, then nodded. Though I'm not sure anywhere is far enough. Later, she drifted off to sleep beneath a cashmere blanket someone had placed over her legs. She should have stayed alert, but Julian's presence, strangely enough, made her feel safe. As she slipped into sleep, the last thing Claire thought was maybe getting on the wrong plane wasn't the worst mistake I've ever made. When Claire woke, the sky outside the window had changed. Clouds glowed orange and pink beneath the setting sun, painting the world in a quiet kind of magic. For a moment she forgot where she was, forgot the jet, the man, the mistake. Then it all rushed back. She straightened instinctively, only to feel something slide off her shoulders. A blanket. Someone had tucked her in. Her eyes moved across the cabin and found Julian, sitting across from her, tapping quietly on a sleek laptop. Without looking up, he said, "Welcome back." Claire's voice came out hoarse. "How long was I asleep?" He finally glanced over, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Almost 6 hours." 6? She echoed, stunned. "I haven't slept that long in... I don't even know." "You needed it," he replied simply, folding his laptop shut. "You were running on fumes." Panic flared in her chest again. "I need to call my brother and Lena, my friend. They're probably freaking out." He reached beside him and picked up a slim phone. "International service, take your time." Claire took the phone with trembling hands and turned toward the window for a bit of privacy. She called Ethan first. He answered on the second ring. "Claire, where are you?" Lena called like 5 times. She exhaled. "Ethan, you're not going to believe this. Try me. I got on the wrong plane. She paused, stealing a glance at Julian before lowering her voice. "I'm on my way to Paris." There was a long silence. Then in a bewildered tone, Ethan asked, "Paris? Paris, France. Yes, it was a mix-up. I'll explain everything when I get back." Another pause. "You're serious? My sister, the one who hasn't had a real day off in years, is flying to Paris?" "You?" Claire groaned. "Not on purpose. Look, I'll be back tomorrow. Are you okay at Aunt Rachel's?" "I'm not 8, Ethan said dryly. "I'm fine. But this is kind of awesome." "It's not awesome," Claire protested, but a reluctant smile tugged at her lips. "It's a disaster. Still cool, though?" She ended the call with a quiet, "I love you," and dialed Lena next. This time, there was no pause for surprise, just immediate, rapid-fire scolding. "Claire! Oh my God, are you okay? I thought you got kidnapped or had a breakdown or both. Atlantic City is not the same without you." "I'm fine," Claire said quickly. "Just accidentally boarded a billionaire's private jet." There was a beat. Then Lena laughed so hard Claire had to pull the phone away from her ear. "Only you," Lena gasped, "only you could do a double at the hospital and end up in Europe by accident." When the calls were over, Claire handed the phone back to Julian with a sheepish smile. "Thanks. They're surprisingly okay with all this." He tilted his head. "Your brother seems like a smart kid." "He is," she said, then added, "He Googled you." Julian blinked. "Already?" He said, "You're a tech genius." "And a billionaire." A flicker of discomfort passed over Julian's face. "I run a software company, yes, security systems. Your brother might have read something inflated." Claire raised an eyebrow. "So you're not rich?" "Oh, I'm very rich," he said dryly. "Just not fond of the label." Before she could respond, the jet dipped slightly. Lights of Paris glittered below like scattered stars. "It's beautiful," Claire murmured, leaning toward the window. Julian didn't answer. When she turned, she saw that he was looking at her, not the city. The jet touched down smoothly at Charles de Gaulle. Claire's heart thudded with nerves as the realization sank in. She was in Paris. Actually in Paris. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered to herself. As the cabin door opened, Julian turned to her. "We'll go through a private terminal. No lines, no customs." She frowned. "Is that even legal?" He smiled faintly. "Perfectly. Just one of the perks." Outside, a black car waited on the tarmac. The driver, an older Frenchman in a tailored suit, greeted Julian in smooth native French before opening the door for Claire. "To the hotel, sir?" the driver asked. Julian looked at Claire. "Unless you'd prefer the airport." She hesitated. The smart thing would be to leave, go home to Ethan, prepare for her Monday shift. But the lights of Paris pulled at something deeper, something long buried. "My shift's not until Monday evening," she said slowly. "Maybe I could stay one night?" Julian's brow lifted, surprised. Then he smiled, a rare, soft one that reached his eyes. "The hotel has plenty of rooms. You'll have your own, of course." Claire started to protest. "I couldn't let you—" "You're here because of a mistake that wasn't yours," he said gently. "Let me make it comfortable." Too tired to argue, Claire nodded. The car wove through the city's cobbled streets. The Eiffel Tower glimmered in the distance. Claire pressed her forehead to the window like a child, breath fogging the glass. "This is insane," she whispered. "When was the last time you traveled?" Julian asked, his voice quiet. 6 years ago. College trip to Canada. That was it." He glanced over. "I travel too much. It's lost its magic." "That's sad," Claire said softly. Julian looked away. "Maybe it is." The hotel was something out of a dream, gilded, grand, and quietly opulent. Crystal chandeliers, velvet chairs, staff that moved like shadows. "Welcome back, Mr. Cross," the manager said warmly. "Your suite is ready." "And a separate room for Miss Bennett, please," Julian added. Claire was led to a room bigger than her entire apartment. The bed looked like a cloud. There was a balcony with a view of the Eiffel Tower and a tub deep enough to swim in. She turned in a slow circle, stunned. This isn't real. A knock interrupted her awe. A staff member wheeled in her backpack and handed her a note. In neat handwriting it read, "Breakfast at 9, rooftop restaurant. The view is worth it." Claire stared at the note, then at the city lights outside. She should have felt overwhelmed, out of place. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Alive. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the gauzy curtains of Claire's hotel room, pulling her gently from sleep. For a moment, she didn't move. The bed was impossibly soft, the silence unfamiliar. There were no monitors beeping, no hallway doors slamming shut, no footsteps of overworked nurses, just Paris, waiting outside her window. When she finally rose, her body ached in places she hadn't even noticed the night before. It was the ache of rest after too much survival. She showered quickly, then dressed in the only clean outfit she had, yesterday's jeans and the soft blue sweater she'd worn on the plane. At exactly 9 o'clock, a knock came at the door. A woman stood in the hallway with several garment bags and a small rolling suitcase. "Compliments of Mr. Cross," she said with a polite smile. "He thought you might appreciate something fresh to wear." Before Claire could respond, the bags were laid neatly across the bed, and the woman disappeared down the hallway. Claire stared at the sleek luggage. She should have refused. She should have sent it all back. But when she unzipped one of the bags, she found simple, elegant clothes. Nothing flashy or overdone, just soft fabrics, clean lines, muted colors. Things that didn't scream wealth, but whispered care. Somehow, every piece was in her exact size. Claire hesitated for a long moment before choosing a dark pair of jeans and a white blouse that made her feel less like the exhausted ICU nurse from New Jersey and more like someone who belonged in a rooftop restaurant overlooking Paris. The elevator opened into a glass-walled space filled with golden morning light. The city sprawled below them, rooftops catching the sun. Claire paused at the threshold, momentarily breathless. Julian stood near a corner table, his back to her, dressed in a pale button-down and slacks that looked effortless. He turned when he saw her. "You look rested," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "The clothes fit," she replied, sliding into the seat. "Thank you. But you really didn't have to." "I wanted to," Julian said, motioning to the waiter. "Consider it an apology for the mix-up." They ate in silence for a moment. Coffee, fresh pastries, fruit that tasted sweeter than it had any right to. As Claire sipped her drink, Julian spoke without looking at her. "I found a flight for you, direct to New York. It leaves tomorrow evening." "Tomorrow," Claire repeated, surprised. "Not today?" "All the direct flights were booked," he said, setting down his cup. "Unless you'd prefer a connection through London or Frankfurt." She should have insisted on leaving today. That would have been the responsible thing. But the idea of one more day in Paris, one more day in this impossible bubble, was too tempting. "Tomorrow's fine," she said, already texting Ethan. Julian nodded. "Good. Then I have a proposal." She raised an eyebrow, cautious. "A business proposal?" He smiled faintly. "Nothing like that. Just, let me show you Paris today. The real Paris. Not the Eiffel Tower or the Louvre, the parts most people don't see." Claire hesitated. "Why?" "Because," Julian said quietly, "for the first time in a long while, I'm actually curious about something, someone, other than myself." She studied him. "You must have better things to do than play tour guide for a stranger." He didn't flinch. "Maybe. But the truth is, You didn't know who I was. You didn't care about the plane or the hotel. You're not impressed by any of this." Claire shrugged. "I'm just a nurse from New Jersey. I don't have time to be impressed." "Exactly," Julian said. "That's what makes you different." Against her better judgment, Claire found herself smiling. "One day," she said, "that's all I can give you." He nodded, standing. "That's all I'm asking for." They started on a quiet street, tucked behind the hotel, in a cafe so small the tables practically touched. Julian ordered in fluent French. The owner greeted him like family, kissing both cheeks and eyeing Claire with interest. "You've been here before," she said, watching the interaction. "I lived in Paris for a while after college," he replied, "before the company took over everything." She watched as he stirred his espresso. "Why Paris? I needed to disappear for a while. After Mark died, I couldn't be in the office. Everything reminded me of him." Claire looked down at her cup. "You never really told me about him." Julian was quiet for a moment. "His name was Mark Fletcher. We were college roommates, best friends, business partners. He was fearless. The kind of person who made everyone feel braver just by being around." "What happened?" "Climbing accident. Colorado. We used to go every year. I cancelled at the last minute. Client meeting." Claire heard the guilt buried in his voice. "You think if you'd been there it would have been different?" Julian gave a hollow laugh. "Or I'd be dead too." That silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Shared grief has a way of creating bridges where nothing else can. They wandered through alleyways, past street vendors and hidden courtyards. At a small bookstore, Claire picked up a worn copy of Les Miserables. Julian paid for it before she could argue. "You're impossible," she muttered. "You're welcome," he said, not missing a beat. Later, they stood on a quiet bridge over the Seine, the river catching the light like glass. "Do you ever stop?" Claire asked. "Working, I mean." "No," Julian answered. "I tried after Mark died, but stopping just felt like drowning in slow motion." She looked at him, then at the river. "I know what that feels like." Julian tilted his head. "You said your brother is 18. She nodded. "And brilliant. Wants to be a doctor. Got accepted into 3 good pre-med programs. Scholarships? Some, but not enough. I've been picking up extra shifts to help with tuition." Julian didn't speak. He didn't offer money. He just listened. By the time the sun began to dip, they were sitting on a bench in a small park no tourist would ever find. Spring flowers bloomed in every direction. "I used to come here when I lived nearby," Julian said. "Mark and I talked about retiring in Paris, buying apartments on the same street, complaining about tourists in fluent French. It sounded like a dream." "It was," Julian said, "but we kept chasing deals. There was always one more project." Claire touched his hand lightly. "We always think there will be time." They sat in silence as the light shifted around them. Eventually, Julian stood and offered his hand. "Hungry?" This time, she took it without hesitation. They ended the day at a quiet restaurant tucked into a narrow street in Montmartre, the kind of place without a sign, where the tables were mismatched and the smell of garlic and butter clung to the air like perfume. The owner greeted Julian with a wide grin and a boisterous welcome in French, then turned to Claire with a warm smile and a subtle once-over that wasn't unkind, just curious. As they were seated at a small corner table with a candle flickering between them, Julian leaned back in his chair and said, "Marcel doesn't believe in menus. He cooks whatever's fresh." Claire looked around the dimly lit room, charmed despite herself. "And you just trust him?" "I always have," Julian replied, unfolding his napkin. "So far, he hasn't tried to poison me." The food arrived in small, unannounced courses, crusty bread with something soft and herbed, followed by a steaming bowl of risotto that smelled like heaven. Claire didn't ask what anything was. She just ate, and for the first time in what felt like years, enjoyed a meal without glancing at the time. Over dessert, some kind of impossibly delicate chocolate souffle, Julian asked, "Why nursing?" Claire blinked at the question. "What do you mean?" "Most people have some dramatic story, a moment that defines the decision. I'm just curious." She shrugged, swirling a bit of chocolate on her spoon. "I like helping people, and I'm good at staying calm in chaos." "That's it?" Julian asked, clearly surprised. "Well," she said, thinking for a moment, "my grandmother had cancer when I was in high school. The nurses who took care of her, they made everything less scary. There was one, Sarah, who stayed late one night just to sit with us. I never forgot that." Julian was quiet for a beat. Then, in a voice softer than before, he said, "You're remarkable, Claire Bennett." She let out a small laugh. "No, I'm really not." "You are," he said, his gaze steady. "Most people in your position would be bitter, or looking for an escape. But you're just here, taking care of everyone." Claire's smile faded slightly. "I don't really have a choice." Julian met her eyes. "We always have choices." She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for her water glass, needing something to ground her. They walked back through the city, the night crisp and the streets glowing under lamplight. As they reached the hotel, Julian walked her to the door of her suite. "Thank you," Claire said quietly, "for everything today. It was perfect." "The pleasure was mine," Julian replied, voice low. He hesitated for just a second, then leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. "Good night, Claire." She stood frozen for a moment, heat blooming under her skin. "Good night, Julian." She closed the door and leaned against it, heart racing. This was not her life. This was a dream wearing someone else's shoes. And yet, it felt so real. The next morning, she woke earlier than expected. The sun poured through the windows, golden and uninvited, reminding her that time was running out. One day left, that was all. As she stepped into the shower, her thoughts tangled about Ethan, about the hospital, about this man who felt less like a billionaire and more like a story she hadn't finished reading yet. When she emerged, she found another outfit waiting, simple but lovely, a pale sundress that fit her perfectly. She didn't remember mentioning her size to anyone. Downstairs, she found Julian already waiting in the lobby, dressed in dark jeans and a navy sweater. His hair was slightly tousled, and he looked more relaxed than the day before. "You're early," Claire said as she approached. "I couldn't sleep," he replied, then nodded toward the door. "I thought we'd start with the market." They spent the morning weaving through a small street market on the edge of the city. Locals bartered over fresh bread, cheeses, and jars of honey. Julian greeted vendors like old friends, laughing easily in fluent French. "You seem more at home here than anywhere else," Claire observed as she picked up a jar of fig preserves. "This place reminds me of summer," he said, handing a few euros to the vendor. "My parents used to rent a cottage in the countryside when I was little, back before everything got complicated." Claire gave him a sideways glance. "Even billionaires had childhoods." Julian chuckled. "Mine just ended earlier than most." They bought fruit and bread, cheese and cured meats, then drove to a spot by the river outside the city, a quiet place where the trees bowed low and the world felt slow. They laid everything out on a blanket and sat cross-legged in the sun. "This is the first time in months I've felt still," Claire admitted, biting into a pear. Julian looked at her, eyes narrowed slightly. "You never stop, do you?" She shook her head. "Ethan needed me. After our parents died, I didn't have the luxury." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Tell me something real." Claire frowned. What do you mean? Something you haven't said out loud before. She stared at the grass for a moment, then said, Sometimes I resent him. Ethan. Not him exactly, but the weight of it all. I was 24. I had a job offer in Boston, a plan, and then they died, and everything became about keeping us above water. Julian didn't flinch. That doesn't make you a bad person. She exhaled. It makes me feel like one. He reached over, lacing his fingers with hers. Your turn, Claire said after a moment. Something real. Julian's jaw tightened. His voice was low when he finally spoke. I blame myself for Mark's death. We were supposed to go climbing together. We did it every year, but that time I cancelled last minute. I had a client meeting I couldn't move. He went alone. Claire said nothing. She just squeezed his hand. I told myself I'd fly out the next day. Surprise him at the summit, he continued. Instead, I got a call from a ranger. He'd slipped. They didn't find him for 2 days. You don't know what would have happened if you'd gone, Claire said gently. I know I wouldn't have let him go up that trail. He hated it, said it always felt wrong. I could have stopped him. Or you both would have gone, she said quietly. You don't get to rewrite the past. Tell that to the guilt, Julian replied. They sat in silence, the weight of their stories filling the space between them. That night, back at the hotel, they sat in the library with a fire crackling in the hearth. Claire curled up in one of the armchairs, holding a glass of wine, feeling the warmth of it spread through her chest. This doesn't feel real, she murmured, staring into the flames. It is, Julian said. Maybe more than anything else right now. But tomorrow I go back, she reminded him. Julian set his glass down. What if you didn't? Claire turned to him. What do you mean? Stay, he said, his voice steady. Just 2 more days. I have a house outside the city. It's quiet. We can talk, walk, think. No pressure, no promises. She hesitated. It would be irresponsible, risky, out of character. But then again, so was stepping onto the wrong plane. I'll need to call Ethan, she said finally. Make sure it's okay. Julian smiled. Of course. And just like that, the decision was made. One more chapter in a story she hadn't meant to write, but suddenly couldn't stop reading. Claire woke early the next morning to the scent of freshly brewed coffee and something warm baking downstairs. For a few blissful seconds, she didn't remember where she was. Then the quiet, the softness of the sheets, the sheer space of the guest room, all of it settled in. She was still in Paris, still in Julian's world. Sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains. The room looked like it belonged in a painting. Exposed beams, polished floors, a small vase of wildflowers on the windowsill. She sat up slowly, one hand moving instinctively to the pendant around her neck. The Eiffel Tower charm rested just above her collarbone. He had left it there for her the night before, wrapped in tissue paper with a short, handwritten note. Something to remember this by. Claire hadn't taken it off since. Downstairs she found Julian in the kitchen, already dressed, his sleeves rolled, flipping something on the stove with casual precision. Good morning, he said, not looking up. Claire crossed her arms, leaning against the doorway. You cook? Only when bribing someone to stay an extra day, he replied. She watched him for a long beat, then said, I looked you up. Julian paused mid-motion. My brother sent me a link last night, she continued. Articles, photos. You're worth $4 billion, apparently. I thought you were just a businessman. Julian turned off the stove, letting the silence settle. He moved slowly, deliberately before speaking. I wasn't hiding it to deceive you, he said. I just wanted space. A few days to be someone else, not a headline, not a bank balance. Claire's voice was quiet, but steady. So, you let me believe you were just some guy? I didn't lie, he said, turning to face her. "But I didn't correct your assumption. Because I knew the moment you found out, everything would shift." "It already has," Claire replied. "You think I wouldn't have noticed the private jet, the hotel suite bigger than my apartment. I just didn't know how far it went." Julian stepped closer. "I didn't want you to see the money. I wanted you to see me." Claire stared at him, arms still crossed, her voice sharper now. "And what if I'd been someone who did care about the money? What then?" "Then I'd have known," he said. "And I wouldn't have invited you here." She blinked, thrown by the honesty in his tone. Julian exhaled slowly. "I should have told you? I was going to. Tonight, actually. But I wanted one more day, with someone who looked at me and didn't see a number." Claire looked away, jaw tight. "I don't know what to think." He stepped back, giving her space. "Then don't think," he said gently. "Come with me, just for today. And if after that you still want to go, I'll drive you to the airport myself." The car ride was quiet. Outside the city, the landscape turned softer. Green hills, stone walls, sleepy villages. When they pulled into a tree-lined driveway that led to a stone house straight out of a postcard, Claire barely reacted. She was still processing. Julian helped her out of the car, motioning toward the house. "This is one of your places," she said flatly. He didn't deny it. "One of 5, yes, this one's my favorite." Inside, the home was elegant but lived in. Shelves filled with books, soft rugs, a grand fireplace. A woman greeted them at the door, older, dignified, and clearly familiar with Julian. "Madame Bertrand manages the house," he explained. "Lives in the cottage out back with her husband." Claire nodded politely, but said nothing. Lunch was light. Bread, salad, wine. Claire picked at her food. Julian gave her time. It wasn't until they stepped into the garden behind the house that the silence finally broke. "You have all this," she said, gesturing around, "and you wanted to spend time with a nurse from New Jersey." Julian walked beside her. "I wanted to spend time with you. You, specifically." Claire's voice cracked slightly. "You didn't even know me." He stopped walking. "That first night on the plane, you looked exhausted. But you were still polite, still kind. Then you told me about Ethan, about your parents, and I saw someone who knows how to carry weight most people would collapse under." She didn't respond. Instead, she sat on a bench near the edge of the garden. Julian joined her, the wind rustling through the tall grass around them. "You really think we could work?" she asked finally. "You and me?" "This? I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I've felt more alive in the past 3 days than I have in the last year." She stared at the grass, twisting the silver chain around her fingers. "I don't want your money, Julian. I know. And I don't want to be someone you rescue from a hard life." "You're not," he said quickly. "You're someone who built a life from wreckage. I'm just trying to be a part of it if you'll let me." Claire let the silence stretch. "I'm scared," she said at last, "that this will end as suddenly as it began, that I'll fall for you and you'll realize I don't belong in this world of yours." Julian's voice was steady. "Then let's build a new world, one that belongs to both of us." She turned to him slowly. "You really believe that's possible?" He nodded. "With the right person, yes." Claire exhaled, tension melting just slightly. "You're incredibly persistent. You're incredibly worth it," he replied. They sat there for a while, the breeze carrying the scent of lavender from a nearby field. Later in the kitchen, they cooked together. Claire grated cheese while Julian chopped herbs. Their movement slowly fell into rhythm, an unspoken partnership. "Mark's mother taught us both to cook," Julian said, sprinkling basil over the pasta. "She said no son of hers was going to live on instant noodles." Claire smiled. "She sounds like she was wonderful." "She was," Julian said. "Died 5 years ago. Cancer." Mark took it hard. They were all each other had. There was a pause. That's why I understood about Ethan," he added, "and about you." Claire felt something shift in her chest, a crack widening to let light in. That night they sat in the library again, the fire warm, glasses of wine in their hands. "So what happens when I go home?" Claire asked quietly. "When I go back to shifts and rent and grocery budgets?" Julian met her eyes. "Then we figure it out. Together. You don't think it's too much? The distance, the difference in our lives?" "I think you're worth the effort," he said. Claire sipped her wine, her heart thudding. "You know this is insane, right?" Julian nodded. Beautifully so. When she rose to head to bed, he walked her to the guest room door. She hesitated for a moment, then leaned in and kissed his cheek. "Good night, Julian. Good night, Claire." She closed the door and leaned against it, the glass of wine still warm in her hand, and whispered to no one, "What am I getting myself into?" The next morning, Claire awoke to the sound of rain tapping gently against the window. It had rolled in quietly during the night, soft and persistent. She watched droplets slide down the glass, her body still wrapped in the warmth of linen sheets, unsure whether the ache in her chest was comfort or hesitation. Downstairs, Julian was already by the fire, a cup of coffee in his hands. He glanced up when she entered, eyes bright, despite the grey light filtering through the windows. "Morning," he said. Claire sat across from him, pulling her knees up into the oversized armchair. "This place feels unreal." "It's not," he replied. "It's just quiet enough that you can hear yourself think. And what if I don't like what I hear? Then you change the volume," Julian said with a faint smile. They spent most of the day indoors. The rain refused to let up, but neither of them seemed to mind. They read, cooked again, argued gently over how much salt belonged in soup. In the afternoon, Claire asked if he had any music. Julian disappeared for a moment, returning with a vintage record player and a collection of vinyls that looked older than both of them combined. He placed one on carefully, and soon the soft voice of Nina Simone filled the room. Claire closed her eyes and let the music soak into her bones. She opened them again when Julian spoke. "I used to listen to this with my mum. She loved old jazz, said it was music with a spine." Claire smiled. She was right. By evening, the rain began to ease. The two of them sat outside under the covered porch, blankets around their shoulders, mugs of tea in hand. Julian broke the silence. "I know you have to leave tomorrow." Claire nodded. "I booked a flight this morning, New York, direct, early evening." He didn't argue. He just sipped his tea and said, "I'm not good at goodbyes." Claire looked at him carefully. "Then maybe this doesn't have to be one." His eyes lifted to hers. "I don't know what this is," she continued. "But I don't want it to end just because my vacation is over." Julian nodded slowly. "Then let's not pretend this was just an accident." She leaned back, pulling her blanket tighter. "When I tell people I met a billionaire because I was sleep-deprived and got on the wrong plane, they're going to laugh in my face." "You'll be the most interesting person at any party," Julian said. Claire laughed. "I never go to parties." "Then I'll take you to one," he offered. "Or we'll have our own. You, me, your brother, and terrible takeout." "Speaking of Ethan," Claire said, "I called him, told him everything." Julian arched an eyebrow. "Everything?" "Enough. He knows about you, about this place. He said it sounds insane, but nice." Julian smiled. "Smart kid." That night they didn't say goodnight immediately. Instead, they lingered by the fire again, both of them reluctant to step away from the space they'd carved out between them. Julian reached across the space and took Claire's hand. His voice was low when he spoke. "You scare me a little." She looked at him, surprised. "Why?" "Because you're real and honest, and I didn't expect to feel this way again." Claire didn't pull her hand away. "Me neither." There was a pause. Then she added quietly, "I haven't let anyone get close in years. It was always too complicated." Julian's thumb moved lightly over her knuckles. "I don't want to be a complication. I want to be something good." "You don't even know what my world looks like," she warned him. "Then show me," he said. The next morning, Claire boarded the plane alone. Julian stood with her until the last possible second at the private terminal. As she turned to walk towards security, he called after her, "Claire." She looked back. "This isn't the end." She held his gaze. "I know." The flight was quiet. Claire slept most of it, the time difference and emotional weight catching up with her all at once. When she landed at JFK, her heart sank at the dull grey sky, the chaos of the terminal, the sharp contrast from the stillness of the last few days. Ethan met her at the curb, earbuds dangling, hair messy, backpack slung low. "You look different," he said, squinting at her as she climbed into the passenger seat. Claire shrugged. "Paris changes people, apparently." "So does falling for someone," Ethan added. She glanced at him, startled. "What makes you think that happened?" "You smiled just now," he said. "The real kind. You never do that." Claire laughed. "Shut up and drive." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Ethan asked, "So what now?" "I go back to work tomorrow night," she said. "Try to remember how to function on hospital coffee and no sleep." "And him?" Claire looked out the window. "I don't know. He said he wanted to see my world. So I guess we'll find out." 3 days later, Claire returned from the hospital at dawn to find someone waiting on the front steps of her apartment building. Julian stood, holding 2 cups of coffee and a brown paper bag. "Morning," he said. "You look like you just did 12 hours in combat." "I did," she replied, stunned. "What are you doing here? You said to come see your world." "So I'm here." Claire blinked, still trying to catch up. "You didn't even text me." "Surprise visit," Julian said, holding out one of the coffees. "Hope it's still hot." She took it automatically. "What's in the bag?" "Everything bagels. Apparently it's a thing here." She stared at him for a long second, then asked, "How long are you staying?" "As long as you'll have me." Claire didn't smile, didn't react. She just stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him, and said quietly into his shoulder, "I missed you." Julian held her tighter. "Good, because I missed you too." Julian stayed. Not in a hotel, not in some penthouse suite across the river, but right there, on Claire's sagging second-hand couch in the living room of her small apartment in Jersey City. He insisted. Said it was part of the deal, said he wanted to see what her mornings looked like when she was barely awake and her fridge had nothing but mustard and half an onion. On the first morning, Claire woke to find him sitting cross-legged on the floor, his laptop open, 2 mugs of coffee beside him. "You really don't sleep much, do you?" she asked, yawning as she shuffled past him in oversized socks. "I sleep when I'm not fascinated," Julian replied, sipping from his mug. She poured cereal into a bowl, then paused and looked at him. "You're still fascinated?" Julian nodded, more than ever. That afternoon, Claire took him with her to the grocery store. A small neighborhood place where the aisles were narrow and the lighting made everything look slightly sad. She threw apples, frozen broccoli, and a box of generic pasta into the cart, while Julian followed behind her, mildly amazed. "No driver? No curated baskets of heirloom tomatoes?" "Welcome to the real world," she said, tossing a block of discount cheddar into the cart. Julian examined it like it might be radioactive. "This cheese is suspiciously orange." "That's how we know it's legit," Claire replied. Later that night, they sat on the fire escape, knees touching, sharing slices of greasy pizza from the place around the corner. Julian had taken off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves. He looked oddly comfortable there, surrounded by cracked brick and city noise. "You're not exactly what I pictured when I thought of tech billionaire," Claire said between bites. "And you're not what I pictured when I thought of burned-out nurse," Julian replied. She nudged his shoulder with hers. Flattering. "I mean it," he said, more serious now. "You have this way of carrying the weight without letting it crush you. Most people I know don't even realize how much they're carrying until they break." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're not exactly broken either. Not the way you think you are." He looked over at her, one eyebrow raised. "No? No," she said, "just cracked in a few places." "Cracks let light in," Julian said softly. The next day, Julian met Ethan. Claire wasn't sure how it would go. Her brother could be blunt, especially when protective, but when she opened the door and found the two of them already deep in conversation, Ethan asking about Julian's security software and Julian actually sketching something on a napkin, she knew it had gone better than expected. "He's not what I expected," Ethan told her later as she cleared plates from the table. Claire dried her hands on a dish towel. "What did you expect?" "Honestly," Ethan said. "Some slick older guy trying to impress you with a yacht?" Claire snorted. "Not really his style." "Good," Ethan replied. "You don't need impressing. You need someone who'll show up." Julian did show up. He came to Claire's night shift once, bringing her dinner and sitting in the staff lounge until she could steal 5 minutes. He stayed late with Ethan to help him prep for a scholarship interview. He took her to a tiny bookstore downtown and bought her a paperback copy of a novel she'd mentioned only in passing. He didn't ask for anything. He just stayed. One night, a week after he'd arrived, Claire stood in the hallway of her apartment, staring at him, while he washed dishes in her tiny kitchen. Something about the sight of him there. Sleeves rolled, hands soapy, humming softly, made her throat tighten. Julian glanced over his shoulder. "You okay?" "Yeah," she said, her voice soft. "I just never thought I'd see someone like you fit in somewhere like this." He shut off the tap and dried his hands. Then he walked over to her and said, "That's because I don't belong to a place, Claire. I belong to people. And you're one of those people." Claire felt her heart shift, slow and certain. "So," she asked, "what now?" Julian took a breath. "I'm not going to ask you to move across the world for me. That's not fair. But I also don't want this to be temporary. I've done temporary. It's hollow." Claire watched him closely. "You want long-term? I want real," he said. "Whatever that looks like, even if it means flying back and forth for a while, even if it's messy." Claire leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "That's going to be expensive." "I can afford it," Julian said with a smile. She laughed. "I don't need grand gestures." "That's good," he replied, "because I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to stay." The next day, Claire returned home from work to find Julian asleep on the couch. Ethan passed out in the armchair beside him, both of them surrounded by empty popcorn bowls and an open laptop playing some old sci-fi movie. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching. This wasn't Paris, this wasn't magic, it was better, it was real. 2 months later, Claire stood in the middle of a quiet pine forest, tugging at the zipper of her windbreaker as crisp autumn wind drifted between the trees. Somewhere behind her, leaves crunched under heavy footsteps. She didn't have to turn around to know it was Julian. "You really packed all that into one backpack?" he asked as he appeared beside her, slightly out of breath, cheeks flushed from the hike. "I'm a nurse," she replied. "Efficient packing is part of the job description." Julian gave her a skeptical look. "I don't believe that for a second. You just didn't want me to offer to carry anything." She smirked, brushing a leaf from his shoulder. "Correct." They were 3 hours into a weekend trip Claire had planned. A modest cabin in a state park her father used to take her and Ethan to when they were kids. No Wi-Fi, no luxury mattresses, no concierge, just trees, wind, and silence. Julian had said yes before she even finished describing it. At the top of the trail, they paused to catch their breath. The view opened into a wide valley below, red and gold spilling across the hills like spilled paint. Claire let the wind hit her face, chest rising and falling with the kind of steady breath she rarely felt in the city. "This is what I needed," she said quietly. Julian leaned beside her against the wooden railing. "Fresh air and aching legs." "Time," Claire corrected. "Space. The kind that isn't filled with machines beeping or phones ringing or expectations." Julian glanced at her. "You feel like you have to be everything for everyone." "It's not a feeling," she said. "It's just reality. Ethan, my patience, the bills, the future, it's all on my shoulders." "And what about you?" he asked. "Who's carrying you?" Claire didn't answer at first. Then she looked at him and said, "I think you already know." They hiked back to the cabin in a slow rhythm, hands brushing now and then, but not always holding. It was comfortable, wordless, the way real things tend to be when there's no need to fill the space with performance. Julian insisted on building the fire when they returned. Claire watched from the edge of the couch as he fumbled with the kindling, swore under his breath, and finally got the flames to catch. "I have to admit," she said, smiling, "I wasn't sure you could do that." Julian stood, brushing soot from his palms. "Your confidence in me is inspiring." She tilted her head. "You've done a lot of adjusting. My world, I mean. The noise, the mess, the grocery store cheddar." Julian moved to sit beside her, the fire casting soft shadows across his face. "I like your world. It's honest. It's not about appearances or curated smiles. It's about survival and joy in tiny doses. I didn't know how much I needed that until I met you." Claire rested her head on his shoulder, letting the warmth from the fire and his words melt into her chest. "You still live in Paris," she said. "I do," he agreed. "But I also live here now, with you, wherever that is, for as long as you'll let me." She closed her eyes. "You're not scared?" "Of course I'm scared," Julian replied. "But I've been more scared of living a life that looks perfect and feels hollow." They sat in silence, listening to the fire crackle, the wind whispering through the trees outside. The next morning, Claire woke early and slipped outside, blanket draped around her shoulders, hot mug of coffee in her hands. The air was sharp, still damp with morning dew. Birds chirped somewhere high above. Julian stepped out a few minutes later, rubbing his eyes, hair wild from sleep. "You're not a morning person, are you?" Claire asked without turning. "Absolutely not," he mumbled, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "But for this view, and you, I'll make an exception." They stayed that way for a while, just breathing. Claire finally turned, resting her mug on the porch railing. "I'm in," she said. Julian blinked. "In?" "For the long haul," she clarified. "You, me, the cross-continental logistics, the hard parts, all of it." His voice was quiet. "Are you sure?" Claire nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything. I don't want a perfect life. I want a real one, with you." Julian reached for her hand, fingers threading through hers. "I'll book my next flight to New York tonight." "We'll make it work," she said, one weekend at a time. As they packed up the cabin later that day, Julian found her old hiking boots by the door and lifted them with a grin. "These things look older than me." "They probably are," Claire replied, "but they've never let me down." "Kind of like you," Julian said, his voice softer now. Claire looked over her shoulder and smiled. "Let's just try not to get lost again." Julian stepped close, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I don't think either of us ever was. We just hadn't found the right gate yet." Later, as they drove down the winding road away from the cabin, Claire rolled the window down and let the cool air fill the car. This, she thought, was the beginning of something. Not a fairy tale, not a mistake. Just two people, wildly different, choosing the same direction. One weekend, one decision, one heartbeat at a time. And this time, she was boarding the right flight.